So why did you want to be a journalist and an author? And did something inspire you at the first place?
Oh yes, my my father was a journalist, and he was always in trouble. And one of the things about being a kid is that you can detect excitement, but you can't detect trouble. So at one point he wrote an article, and the result was there were men with guns chasing us, and my mother was saying, "This is so bad, you wrote this thing and now men with guns are chasing us." And I was just thinking, whoa, this is so cool. Dad, you're the coolest dad. So from then on I thought, one day I will write something and it will be so annoying that men with guns will chase me. So I'm afraid I've failed so far, but one day, maybe.
Okay, so just now you mentioned about your father and mother. Did your parents support your decision to become a writer?
No. I think any sensible parent would not support this sort of decision. So, yeah, I think one thing about Asian parents is that they are very sensible, and they will always tell their children to go into sensible jobs. Yeah, so they were not very happy when I followed my father's footsteps. You know, sometimes it turns out to be the right thing to do. So, you know, luckily this was the right occasion, I hope.
If you were not a writer, what would you be?
I think I'd have starved to death a long time ago. I think everybody is good at one thing. You know, God gives all of us some ability, so you have to find out what that ability is. And my only ability is a very humble one, is I can put words together and occasionally make people laugh. So that's my tiny ability God gave me. I don't know why he's so mean to me.
It's a great ability.
Well, it's rare, but it's not a very steady job. You know, why couldn't he have made me an accountant or something? Then I would be rich and famous, or a TV or a newspaper executive. Then I would be very rich, like Catherine.
Mr. Jam, we know that you have a blog. So what do you enjoy about writing and publishing your daily experience on the internet?
Well, I guess, you know, when I get interviewed by grown-up journalists who are way more boring than you, they ask me about my books, because books are big, serious things that are hard to get published. But the trouble with books is that, you know, they take a year or two to write, then they get published, and then you don't get any feedback till long after you've written it. But with the joy of the internet, I can write something, and 10 minutes later, in theory, I could have men with guns trying to kill me for it. So I think, this is so cool. I can just annoy people all around the world instantly. Yeah?
How did you come up with the name, Mr. Jam?
Oh, right. Oh, there's a story there. One year I was doing 2 book tours, and I had two books which were quite successful that year. One was a murder mystery, and the other was a children's book. And I kept getting angry letters because you know, the murder mystery club of Austria or Switzerland would have accidentally ordered a set of children's books. And I say, what is this rubbish? We don't want this. And then worse still, there'd be some primary school in Australia who ended up with all these murder books. And so everybody was upset. So my publisher said, look, use one of your other names for some of your writing, and keep your real name for murder mysteries. And that's how I ended up with 2 names.
What is your typical day like? Do you spend the whole day writing or publishing something on your blog?
No, gosh, no. No one would pay me to do that. No. Well, that's the thing about creative industries, is that if you do anything creative, whether it's writer, singer, cartoonist, artist, songwriter, any of those things are always gambles. So, you know, you write one song or one book and it's a huge hit, and then the next one, nobody buys it. And then the third one, a few people buy it. And then the fourth one, maybe a lot of people buy it. So it's completely unpredictable. So bank managers, they hate people like me because they can't keep track of us, you know. Creative people, they earn a lot of money one month and then nothing the next month. So to handle that, creative people nearly always have a few regular jobs. So, for example, I'm a professor at one of the universities, professor of storytelling at Polytechnic University. So as long as I turn up there occasionally and give lectures, you know, they'll give me a steady income. And then it doesn't matter if one of my books is a disaster and the next book is a hit. So nearly all creative people have these two jobs. And then when they become quite famous, I mean, I've met lots of writers who've won the big prizes, like the Booker Prize. When they become famous, they keep their other jobs because, you know, it's kind of fun. Like, for example, I don't really need my job in the university anymore, but I really like it because I meet so many people. Professors are they're all a bit crazy, and the students are really fun, so I keep my job even though I don't need it.
Among the books that you have written, which do you like most and why?
Well, I don't really like any of my books. The thing is that when you write or do anything artistic, you know, you get a little bit better every time. So when you look back at your old things, you think, "Ew, did I write that? It's so bad." And that's one of the problems with the book business, because a book is usually published about 1 year after you write it. So I get a call from a reporter and they say, "Tell us about your new book." And I'm thinking, "Oh, what book is this?" "Oh, it's the detective story number 4. And then what's in my mind is, "Oh, that's a terrible book compared to number 5, which I just finished." But you see, I can't say that. I'll get into big trouble. So I have to say, "Oh yeah, it's quite good." And really, my mind is on the next one. That's the problem with these books. But the books I've been most pleased with the reception of are, I wrote some books for kids, and people told me, "You can't publish this for kids, not suitable." One was about death. It was called Dead Eric Gets a Virus. And one was about the theory of relativity, which is like, it's the most complicated idea in the world. And I wrote both these books for children and they did really well, and one of them won an award. The Theory of Relativity is a book that 99% of grown-ups would not understand, but it's a really interesting book. So I made it simpler and wrote it for children, and most children could understand it.
So, what do you think it is the most important element for a story, for a good story?
Yeah, it's the most important element is fun. You know, if people don't have fun reading it, then they won't read till the end of it. And also, if you don't have fun writing it, then it won't be fun to read. So you've got to sit there and you've got to think of these characters, and you've got to do weird and nasty things to them. One of the tricky things is that when you make a character, you know, you kind of like your character, but you have to make him suffer. Otherwise, no one will read the book. So you make this nice character. Once there was a nice little girl called Michelle, and you've got to think of horrible things that can happen. She was in the Fringe Club when a group of people, and they'd all started to go crazy, you know, or something. You have to think of terrible things. And then, of course, in the end, she has to win, because I believe in happy endings. Lucky for you.
Okay. So, we know that many of your books are related to Hong Kong's culture, or the culture of different countries. Why do you choose to include these elements in your books?
Well, you know, there are so many books about the Western world, especially America, and yet, can you guess what percentage of the world lives in Asia? Do you guess?
35?
It's actually 61% of the world lives in Asia. So most people think it's about 30%, but it's actually 61%. So most of the world, the majority of the world lives in Asia, but nearly all the books, all the bestsellers, all the CDs, all the movies, all the culture, all the culture that's internationally popular tends to be Western. So, so Asians, you know, we have to fight back with some Asian culture. Yeah.
Before you come to Hong Kong, you had been working in England. What do you think is the main cultural difference between these two countries?
Between UK and Hong Kong, that's a good question. Let's see. You know, in UK, people are. I mean, both countries are very polite. For example, both countries have queuing systems. In most Asian countries, nobody queues up for anything. Have you been to Thailand or mainland China? You know, there's the ticket window, and then there's like 100 people around it, and they're all reaching like this. Now, Hong Kong and England both have this queuing system, except in Hong Kong, people are more gentle. So, for example, if you're in a queue and then somebody jumps in front of you, you know, you go, and you'll frown at the next person. The other person, their eyebrows will go down, but no one will actually do anything. Whereas if you break a queue in England, you know, people will be so angry. They will grab the guy, they will shoot him, they will call the police. It's like a crime. Breaking a queue is almost equivalent to murder in England. And then, you know, if you get taken to court for murdering somebody, you just say, he jumped the queue. And the judge will say, oh, okay, it's all right to kill him then. You know, it's almost that bad, you know. So, so that's one similarity and one difference.
What is it about Hong Kong that you find attractive or interesting?
Oh, Hong Kong people. You know, when I first came in the 1980s, I just fell in love with the place and the people, and people are very gentle and very clever, and you know, there's there's no violence here and stuff. So there's so many things I really love about it. One thing that worries me a bit about it, though, is the creativity. Like, for example, there's not too much creativity here, or at least it's the young people are creative, but my generation of Hong Kong people are not. Let me give you an example. They can create buildings, but they cannot think of names for them, so they just put labels on them. So, for example, what is this part of Hong Kong called? The central part is called Central. And if you look at the map and find the building in the middle of Central, it's called Central Building. If you look at the water in London, it's called the Thames. The water in Paris is called the Seine. The water in New York is called the Hudson. But our harbour is called the harbour. You know, so there's not much imagination. There's not much creativity. So, but I think this generation will change that. Your generation.
So do you think it's difficult to be an English language writer in Hong Kong?
No, because there aren't any. Well, there are hardly any writers in Asia. You know, Asia is such a big place, but there are very few writers who are. You know, it's easy enough to write something for your local magazine or newspaper or school magazine, but to write a book that gets published around the world in different languages. That's a bit tricky, but every country in the West has these people, but Asia doesn't have these people. I mean, can you name an Asian writer that's published internationally? It's hard to think of any, isn't it? It's really hard. There are a small number, but very small. Sometimes I ask grown-ups, sometimes I ask even like school librarians whose whole business is books. I say, name an Asian author, and they can't think of one. And then eventually they'll say, Salman Rushdie, but he lives in America. And then they'll say, you know, Maxine Hong Kingston, and say, well, she lives in San Francisco. In fact, there's very few Asian writers, so it's a good thing to do. So if you want to be a writer, you know, it's a good thing to do here, but don't tell your parents, okay? Tell them you're going to be an accountant.
What kind of people make the best writers?
Well, you know, writing is actually quite hard work. In fact, look, I actually brought along some books for you. People always focus on having the good ideas and things, but in fact, Okay, here's a kid's book. Okay, there's not many words in a kid's book, but if you look at, okay, there's the Einstein book I mentioned. Now, a book this size is a typical children's book. There's 20 to 30,000 words in there. So, as well as having a good idea, you've actually got to sit down and just be by yourself and type for a long, long time. And then if you look at a grown-up book, here's a typical grown-up book, okay? Now that's 100,000 words. 100,000 words, that takes a while to write. You know. So if you want to be a writer but you're quite lazy, go for the baby books. Like, okay, look, I'll show you, give you an example. Okay, now here's a children's book. Now I write this bit, the words, and my friend does the pictures, this bit, right? Guess who gets paid more? That's right, I get paid more. Why do I get paid more? Well, it took me maybe a minute to write that. It took him about 600 hours probably to draw this. But I get paid more because the guy who has the idea gets all the money. So this is my advice to you. Never be an artist, always be a writer.
Oh, is it only passion that you need to become a good writer then?
Well, if you've got, passion and hard work. So you've got to have the right ideas, but then you've actually got to sit down and actually do the work. I know so many writers who have the idea, but they never finish it. When I did my first book, let's see, I was working as a reporter, and many reporters want to be book writers. So what happened was so many of them came up to me and said, hey, I could do that. I could write a book. You've done it. I could do it. Will you help me? So, I wanted to be nice to them. So eventually I said, hey, listen guys, I will help you get your book published, but only if you come back to me when it's finished. So they said, yeah, sure. See you in a couple of weeks. You know what? None of them ever came back to me with their finished books, because it's so easy to start a book. It's so hard to finish it, because they didn't have the stamina, the energy to keep going until the end, 100,000 words, you have to be serious about it.
How does it feel to be well known for your sense of humor?
Well, I don't think I am. But yeah, I mean, comedy in Asia is a very interesting it's a very interesting topic. In fact, my next book is about comedy in Asia, because I discovered, to my horror, that most people around the world think Asians have no sense of humor. And you can look it up on the internet, and it's just generally believed that Asians, they're good at math, they have nice food, but they can't tell jokes, and they can't. And if you think about it, how many comedy shows or comedians come out of Asia? Very few. There's a couple of good ones in Hong Kong. There's one good one in China, but very few international comedians. So, so I think it's important to show people we are funny. We really are funny. Sometimes deliberately funny, sometimes not, but still. So, yeah, Asian humor is very important. I did a comedy tour a couple of years ago, and it started off really badly. And I was thinking, and people kept saying to me, oh, you're never going to be a comedian here. Nobody's got a sense of humor. And it started off badly, but it got better and better. And after a while, I was doing the whole region. And after a while, the Muslims were sending me Muslim jokes, including some that the Prophet Muhammad wrote himself. Now, did you know the Prophet Muhammad wrote jokes? I didn't, but he did. He wrote 3 jokes. There were communists sending me jokes about communism from Beijing, and so on. So by the end of the year, I was the master of Asian jokes. I knew Mao Zedong jokes, I knew Deng Xiaoping jokes, I knew all sorts of jokes that nobody had ever heard before, because Asians are funny. We're just not very good at telling the world that we're clever and creative and funny.
I want to ask, when did you discover your sense of humor?
I think people have a sense of humour, you know, when they're very young. So the children, babies are always laughing, aren't they? So I can remember my daughter when she was 1. She'd been listening to her big brother and sister telling knock-knock jokes. You know what a knock-knock joke is?
Knock-knock, who's there?
Knock-knock, who's there? Yeah, she's been listening to this, and she couldn't speak, unfortunately. So there was a silence in the dinner party where someone was opening some wine, and suddenly the baby sort of said, knock-knock! And everybody looked round. The baby spoke. She said, knock-knock. And so we all said, who's there? And the baby said, blah, 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 blah. So we all said, blah, 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 who? And the baby said, blah, 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 blah. And everybody laughed in the restaurant. And I just thought, wow, a 1-year-old baby just told a joke and made people laugh. So, yeah, I think humour is very deep in all of us.
What are some of your unforgettable moments from your journalism career?
Well, I got sacked a lot, so that's pretty unforgettable. I used to write a column in the South China Morning Post, and every day I would make a joke about the main news story. This is why I work for the Standard now, you see, much better newspaper. But I would make a joke about the main news story, and sometimes it got really hard. And in 1997, everyone was very nervous about that. You know, Hong Kong changed from British leadership to China leadership in that year. And people were very nervous, but not me. And then one day, there was the main news story said the leader of China had died. And the government of China put out a message saying, he has not died. His health is normal for his age. So everyone said, so you're going to make a joke about this? So I said, of course I am. So the next day in my column I wrote, his health is normal for a man of his age. His age is 92. The normal state of health for a man of 92 is dead. So it wasn't a very funny joke, but I got into big trouble for it. And then the next day, he actually died. So all these radio personalities, they called me up and said, so you're going to make a joke about that? So I said, of course. So I put it in the next day, I put in a joke which said, so the president of China is dead at the age of 92. Let that be a lesson to all of us. Smoking kills. So again, it's a kind of feeble joke, but again, I got into big trouble. And then the new leader of Hong Kong was appointed, and his name was Dong Ginhua, or in English, Tung Chi-Hua. And so I spelled his name wrong deliberately. Instead of Tung, T-U-N-G, I wrote it like tongue. And instead of Chihuahua, I wrote Chihuahua. Do you know what Chihuahua is?
Dogs.
It's a small, tiny dog. So I created this image of this small dog with his tongue hanging out. And anyway, the boss of the South China Morning Post called me up to his room, and he said, "You can't do this. This guy has no sense of humour. He will kill us all." You know. But what he didn't know is that I have been friends with Dong Ginhua's family for a long time. I knew this guy. I knew his kids. I knew his grandchildren, and I knew he didn't mind me making jokes about him. So. So then I got sacked from South China Morning Post, and the boss said, the government is very angry with you for making these jokes about Tung Chi-Hua. And about 5 days later, there was a phone call in the office, and I wasn't there, but one of my friends was there, and it was somebody calling to complain. Where's the funny guy who makes the joke about the news? And they said, oh, he's not here anymore. And do you know who it was? It was Mrs. Tung Chi-Hua complaining. So there's proof that he has a sense of humour, but you know, the bosses of the newspaper didn't. So.
Are you satisfied with your current achievement?
Yeah, you know, when you get to be an old person, and you'll discover this one day, there's a saying in the celebrity business, in the acting business really, which says that when you reach the top, you send the elevator back down for other people. And so what I do a lot is I do a lot of training of young people. I do. I train writers at the university. I train people outside. So I give a lot of help to young writers. I organize prizes. That's very helpful because if there's a prize going, then the schools will enter the competition. So I do prizes for schools, prizes for, I started a very big prize, the Man Asia Literary Prize, which is now the biggest prize in the world for Asian writers. And I got a prize sponsored by Scholastic, which is the publisher of Harry Potter, for the best children's book writer. So what I do now is focus on helping the next generation of writers. So I hope you will win some of these competitions next year.
Do you have any regrets in maybe entering the creative industry or creating some of the prizes or being a writer?
Yeah, no, life's too short to have regrets. Yeah.
Most of your books are comedy crime novels, children's books, and non-fictions. Would you plan to explore or try the write stories of other genres?
Yeah, sure. So my next book, for example, is going to be more like a biography, because it's about trying to work as a comedian in Asia. I mentioned earlier trying to find the Asian sense of humor. Biography books are interesting because, of course, you have to tell the truth, and you can't really cheat because somebody will find out and they'll say, "Hey, that didn't happen." So you've got to tell the truth, but you've still got to make it interesting. So it's an interesting challenge to write a biography. Yeah.
Do you want to write some genres like horrors?
Well, there's so many horror books, and also, the nice thing is that people are getting smarter. Like in the book business or the movie business or TV or anything. In the old days, you could say to people, you could say to your publisher or the film guy, you say, "I've got a great story. It's full of horror and sex and violence." And they would say, "Hey, sounds good." Now, these days, you can't do that. If you go in and you say to your publisher, "I've got a great story full of sex and horror and violence," they're not very interested because people are quite smart. Instead, you say, "I've got a great story about a boy who doesn't get on with his dad, and then at the end of the story, he gets on a bit better with him." And they'll say, "That sounds interesting," because they're actually interested in stories about people. So even if you look at something like Harry Potter, I mean, what's it really about? It's really about a boy trying to find his mum and dad and trying to reconnect with the idea of his family. That's all, the whole series is just really about that. And if you look at a big film like Avatar, Avatar is all about a guy who's lost his family, goes to look for his brother, and finds a new family. So, you can take out the explosions and the spaceships and the love story and everything, and it's really just really about people. So, I think once you realize this, then you can write powerful stories. Many of the students at the university, they, as part of their course, I'll say, okay, make a short movie, and they practice their special effects and explosions, and they make stories full of explosions and sex and violence. And the one that wins the prize every year has no sex, no violence, no explosions, and no spaceships. It's just about people being people. So that's the secret of good stories. Create a character with a good heart and a bad problem. Like I said earlier, there was a nice girl called Michelle. Boy, was she in trouble. And then you've got a good story.
So do you have any plans or career goals that you want to achieve in the future?
I don't know. When you ask an old person that, they usually have done pretty much everything. But career goals, I don't know. I guess I'd like to change the image of Asia as being, it's seen as uncreative. You know, we don't produce great movies, we don't produce great music, we don't produce comedians, we don't produce great novels. And I think that's going to change, and I'd like to help that change. There was one year, a couple of years ago, when Walt Disney's income in America was beaten by the income of Pokemon. So I thought, wow, an Asian character making more money than an American set of characters. So I was really proud of that. Even though I think Pokemon is really bad, but still, I was proud. It's an Asian character.
If you knew what you know now about being a writer, would you still have pursued the career path?
Yeah, I think, well, somebody wise once said, if I had the time all over again, I would make all the same mistakes, only I'd make them much sooner, because that's how you learn, by making mistakes. But I think it still holds true that if you're doing something creative, it's tricky. It's going to be a tricky life. So, so tell your parents, excuse me, if you're doing something creative, it's going to be tricky. Tell your parents you're going to be an accountant, or or a teacher, or something very steady, and then secretly write great stories on the side. And when you've written your third or fourth or fifth book, then you reveal yourself to your parents saying, "Maha, you thought I was an accountant, but I've been writing books under my pen name, J.K. Rowling. You may have heard of me," or something. And then you switch career and you become something creative.
We know you are teaching in Polytechnic University about writing short stories. Do you think this job challenging, or what do you think about the students in Hong Kong?
Yeah, the students in Hong Kong are great, although one problem with them is that they don't read novels, so they play games and they watch movies. So their characters are very shallow, and the plots, like so many game writers come to me and they say, "Oh, I can write stories," and the story is always the same. There's a guy and he's got a gun, he's going and he shoots these bad guys, and he goes up this tunnel onto level 2, and then there are more bad guys and they're coming faster, and then he goes up to level 3, and then there are more bad guys, you know. And I'm saying that is not a story, but to a game writer that's a story, you know. So I have to persuade them to either read books or to read movies made from books, because they have complexity, they have interesting characters. So yeah, fortunately some of them listen to me.
Personally, when I was young, I really want to be an author, especially a writer for children books. Yes, because I really like the happy atmosphere in the book and want to like bring happiness to children. But then in recent years, I found that I have a deeper interest in mathematics, which I may turn out to be an accountant or something. So, how can you give some advice? No, how can you like persuade me to pursue the? How can you persuade me to be a writer?
Yeah. Well, I wouldn't. I would say be a mathematician, because you know, maths is great. I love maths, and I've written lots of maths things. In fact, my most recent book is a maths book. It's about a boy who has to save the world, and his only tool is his mathematics homework. So he has to use this maths book to defeat this supervillain. And I wrote it deliberately as an educational book, but also to show that maths is really fun and clever and interesting. So people, again, were very skeptical when I wrote this book, but you know, it's great. Maths is cool, isn't it? So yeah, so he does save the world using maths. I think it's better to do something you love and then be creative on the side than make your creative job into your main income earner. when it's not an income earner. Songwriters don't earn money. Cartoonists don't earn money. Beginning writers don't earn any money. So you have to be strategic. I think the fact that it's so difficult to get into a career as a writer or a singer is like a barrier, deliberate barrier that God makes, so that if you're clever enough to somehow get past that barrier, then you've made it. But it's difficult to get past that barrier. And if you're not good enough, you know, people often say to me, you know, follow your dream. Have you heard this phrase? My students are always saying that, follow your dream, important to follow your dream. I tell them, no, it's not. Follow your dream, that's dumb. You know, when I was young, you know who my favorite star was? Arnold Schwarzenegger. Just think what would happen if I tried to be Arnold Schwarzenegger. You know, I'm so small, I'm so weak, you know, useless. So you don't follow your dream. Best thing is there's something missing. You can follow your dream if you're any good at something, you know. For example, if I wanted to be my dream was to be a singer, it's very important that I don't follow my dream because I'm not a good singer. So yeah, so don't follow your dream unless you're good at it.